Easy Troop. So today's video comes from a very simple question of when I start putting loads of different instruments in and I want to build everything up in a track, it starts to get muddy and confusing and it's really hard to mix. We're going to look at one of my old tracks, by the way, that was released with the channel sponsor, which is DistroKid. So if you want to release your music to all of the major streaming and download platforms, check out the link below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution, and you can distribute your track just like this one. So I'm going to show you an example today with a Liquid DnB track that's got lots of channels. I've mixed them down and bounced a couple out, so it's not an overwhelming project. That it's still come out to like 40 channels, look, and that's with the vocals bounced together, and that's with the drum break mostly bounced together. I added some shakers and another snare layer, but the point being there's still lots of layers in there, and especially we're going to look at the strings here so I can show this example. I've taken all the plugins off of them. And just another quick thing, this is the mix track, so if you listen to the master it will sound a little bit different, but I have just bashed a limiter on just for the purpose of if we do anything in the tutorial I don't want it to pop and blow anyone's ears out, know what I mean? So that's the only reason that is there on the master, but otherwise let's roll and get into this. So here's the little section I'm going to use as an example.
Hearts are empty, and now I'm ready to give my heart to someone else now.
Right, and let's just go over everything that is in that particular section. So we've got the break, which is that's mixed and bounced together. And then I ended up adding an extra snare layer in this because I wanted that cluck, cluck, right? There's then a tambourine loop on top of that. I've then got bass and subline. Then we've got the strings that I was talking about. There's a lot going on with them, right? And then we've got the end of this pad fading out, whatever pad I made there. And just hear that filling in a little bit of space. And then these, where it's called the viola stack, that is another synth, another one. That's the lead, violin pad, another pad, cymbal, and the vocals. And that's, I think, two or three channels combined in once I got the balance right, and I liked it as it was. Bounce it down, condense it, it's sorted, right? So 14 channels altogether, and that's a break which was already maybe like 6 or 7 different sounds, but they're all staggered, so there's no big issue there. And then the vocal, which is condensed and takes up a lot of space, right? However, everything's pretty well balanced, right? You can hear every individual element. As I brought it in there as well, you could hear each thing pop up as long as I did it in time. This pad, for example, really fades out, but it's there right at the start, and you could hear that come in. And once you've heard it,
give my heart to someone else.
So that's the very first thing I want to talk about. As you heard there, as I dropped each element in, you could hear it, which means there was space for it. Nothing's necessarily overlapping apart from the example we're going to look at. What I mean here is, right, let's take all the drums, for example. And there's technically a cymbal down here, but I put that in like extras. Right, that covers like the full spectrum of sound, right? If we open up tonal balance right here, we've got low end, we've got high end, the mids are kind of lacking. We've got middle space in there, but there's this high end, you can hear it and all the shakers and the top of the snare, and you've got your kick drum down here as well. But there's still space. You can see in my overall balance here, I've definitely got space in the absolute subs. I've got a space here up in the like lower mids, the like 300 range. So when we bring the bass and subline in, it's filling in those spaces. And obviously the tale as old as time of the bass and the kick fighting each other, that's balanced out a little bit as well. If we go onto the bass itself, we've got Neutron here. Tell how old this track is, Neutron 2. We can close that away. And we've got a bit of work going on here, probably with the compressor. Look, it's taking out like a decibel, if that, from the bass each time. They sit in there, they fit well together. There's space for them. Now, if we look at this like curve here, I've still got all of this mid-range up here that I can make space with. Interestingly, look, the way that's carved out, that is kind of the vocal range of things, right? Easily hear all of those elements now, and you can see in the tone of balance here, it starts to fill out a bit more with that. All of that sits in that range, which is why it's nice and clear the whole time. There are fundamental elements. We can hear everything. It all sits well. They've all got their own space in the mix. If you look at my tonal balance, apart from this extreme high end in here, I don't know if I mixed to this curve, by the way, which is what it is. It all sits and fits in that space, right? Now, all this other stuff, all of this has now got to occupy a space that's already filled with our key elements, our drums, bass, and the vocal in this instance. All of this has got to fit in that range look. It's right in those mids with the vocal and everything else. So what do we do about that so that the overall balance ends up like this? And we can still hear it all. First thing is, the vocal's louder than all of it, so it always cuts through. And it means in those moments when the vocal dips a little bit, we can still hear the vocal, we can still perceive what's going on, but it allows everything to shine through. You listen to that, you'll notice it a bit more. Right? Vocal comes through a little bit louder, you really pick it up with the ear. It's not too loud, it's loud enough that you hear it nicely. The dips out, it feels like all those elements swell up because they're in that same sort of space. And that's just a case of notation and placing of the music and having your vocal as the priority. If we didn't want the vocal to be the priority, we'd dip it down a bit in the mix and all of the instrumentation would start to overwhelm it. Now we can't pick the vocal out as much. If we focus on it, we can hear it. All the instrumentation takes precedent, right? So we bring it back up to where it was, minus 4.5 in this case. But we can still pick the lead and all the strings out. Let me show you something else that's going on. So like I said, I took all of the effects off of these strings here. They're naked, if you will, at the minute. One's coming from Play, it's Goliath. It is the cellos, Maricato, Round Robin. And the other one, I think, is Session Strings. What are we? Preset 1920s with the key switch mode on spiccato. Cool, happy days. So I'm just going to bash an EQ on both of these. I can do that by going boop and boop. And we'll just use the stock Logic one. Let's play those back. So again, they're right in that mid-range, and those two, they're even kind of fighting each other, right? They're the similar chords right over in the same space. If we look at like 400, for example, here and here, we've got loads of energy in both. Bring that right up and bring that right up. Shows a pretty nasty frequency there. But you get my point. They're both right in around that range. They've got loads of energy there. There's loads of sound there. They should be fighting each other, but they work quite well together. They harmonise with each other. They're string instruments. They're using the same chords, slightly different sounds. It's another thing that works. So we've chosen two sounds that work together, and they don't fight each other. They reinforce one another. The other thing is there seems to be no low end on both of these, right? In this instance. And there's not all that much high end either. And that's something that we can look at. So one thing I would say, right? Does this at 100 Hertz give us any benefit? What we can do is take this, roll it down. I will jack this up in editing in case it's really low for you, but I'm going to crank it up here. I don't think that would benefit the track whatsoever. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that element out, right, after we've isolated it. And I'll just do it with a little fade like this. And we'll figure out, does it take away from the sound at all itself? It is a little thinner. But here's the thing. In context of the track, And the answer is no at the end of the day. So we've isolated that out a little bit more. Now the other thing is, there actually is loads of high end even though we can't see it. Yeah, it's all up there. However, it's super, super low. Is that necessarily bringing anything into the track? And the answer is probably no. And I'd end up doing something like this, but giving this little bump up here. So we're like accenting the most interesting high-end bit and getting rid of everything else up here that we don't really need. One of the reasons that we would do that is, let's have a look at the vocal, for example, the thing that we want to be really prominent and stick out all the time and be able to shine. If we open our, what do we got on here? The vocal has got loads of information up here. I don't need that to be fighting with anything that's not bringing the benefit into the track. In this instance, I would take high end away. And I'll probably do that on both of these string tracks. And I would do it to highlight the fact that that vocal can really then push through. The main focus of these strings is still getting this job done. And we'd do a similar thing here. I'd obviously check the low end, but I know a principle because this track was already mixed and released years ago. This is what we did. We end up rolling them off like that. So we've taken that high end away, and now the vocal has more room to shine. There's not a bunch of extra high end going, ha 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 ha, overtaking that. How much of a difference does this make though? Let's take both of these EQs and turn them off. Listen to everything in context. I'm going to bring those EQs in and it's going to take that a little bit high end away. Listen to the shining top end of the vocal.
Hearts are empty, but now I'm ready to give my heart to someone else now. Feeling heavy, but now I'm steady. Going up from hitting the ground. Hearts are empty, but now
I was going to say that's pretty subtle, but it's not really that subtle. We're bumping up the sort of highest important range of those string sounds and taking everything else away. I can hear a massive difference in that the strings pop through a little bit more, but they have no effect on the vocal like attention whatsoever. Now that doesn't just affect the overall vocal, that's just one part of the example. You've got to think about it as a whole. Mixing, you're making 10,000 tiny adjustments like we just did to get the end result. But it also allows things like the lead to shine in that space that it has as well. If we look at the lead, analyzer on, that has got loads and loads of high end. In fact, I've even boosted it up here at 6K. The lead though is a little bit different because the lead runs along with the vocal.
Hearts are empty, but now I'm ready to give my...
We actually want that high end because it helps reinforce the overall story that's going on with the vocal. Taking it away, actually the track just feels a little bit empty now. It's just in there filling in that space. So we've given that lead the ability to shine a bit more, as well as the vocal, reinforcing one another. And that's the thing that I want you to think about in your production when things are getting too busy and too muddied up. What things are working together? Does that high end, that low end, those other bits actually need to be there? Do they reinforce one another? Because if we were to start looking at on the lead here and taking out the same process, you know, let's say we get rid of all that high end. I mean, it's okay, but it's much better like that. And we've given it that extra space by taking away that sound that was there with the strings that gave no benefit whatsoever. So it's that weighing and balance. It feels like everything's there all the time. feels like the strings have all their high ends because your brain hears the strings and it puts it in there for you for the most part. It can't separate all these different frequencies at once, but it knows what strings to sound like. And that is my thing for this video. Have a real think about all those different elements. Do they need to be there? Do they bring benefit? Do they harmonize with one another? Or are they a conflicting element? And can you take that part away and still have it feel like the strings in this example, that everything is still there and in that place? I really hope the video has been helpful for you and given you some ideas for your mixing and how you can apply it. If you want to have a listen to this full track, by the way, I will link that in the description below. Think of artists like Paul and Bryson, where you can hear every individual element in the track. Everything is well separated, yet it fills the full spectrum from the bottom right to the top. And you've got all those different parts and elements working together to give you that full spectrum of sound, but nothing crosses over one another. You can always pick out the hi-hat, the snare, the kick, the vocal, the synths. And it all sits in really great context. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the techniques and methods that we can use to make sure your tracks get that. First off, let's think about sound selection. There's a reason that the drum break contains 3 key elements: a kick drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat. They fill the spectrum. Your kick drum sits down here going ka-dum, ka-dum, ka-dum. Your snare goes dum, ka, dum, ka. And then your hi-hat goes across the top. Let's look at some examples of this in the context of a track and some sound choices. So what we've got here, we've got bass, a break, some hi-hats and effects, and a vocal. And they've not got any effects on, no filtering, nothing. And yet we'll still be able to perceive all of those individual elements when we play it back.
Raised you up, you took no notice of everything I did. Oh, everything I did.
For example, if we take the hi-hats away, bring them in, they've got their own space right away. Same with the vocal and the effects. They're all there in layers, and even the break and the bass can play nice together. So here we can see everything that's in the bass. We've got these big tones down here and this big fundamentals, the main sort of body of it with all the harmonics rolling off here. Right? We add the break into that and the break can fill out all of this space here, but we'd worry a little bit about the kick drum. Well, we can see the kick drum has got a different fundamental frequency to the bass. So when the two are in together, they actually don't fight each other. If the kick drum was lower down and hitting around here, they'd be fighting the whole time. Now there is a harmonic in the bass, absolutely, at this point here, but it's quite quiet compared to the rest of the sound. So they're a good choice to go together and already have that separation. Now there's some hi-hats and other tops going on, but there's quite a lot of space in sort of this area of the break. If we add these hi-hats in, there you go, they're instantly filling out a different space and they're not fighting with one another. Now if we look at the frequency spectrum, there's a big old gap right here. If we just double click that, you can see we're sort of like the 500 range all the way through to the 1K range, which is going to be sort of the fundamental range here of Deggs' vocal. Boom, and you see that area fill out as well. So hopefully that can highlight to you just how important sound selection is. Now, let's not cheat the system, have the vocal extra loud. Let's dip it down 6 dB, sort of balanced a bit more with everything else on that spectrum, still standing out. For argument's sake, a kick drum is going to be around 100 Hz, and the fundamental of the snare, because it has a lot of high-end energy, is going to be around the 200 Hz. So they're 100 Hz apart, giving us some room to play depending on key and whatnot. They're not hard numbers. And the hi-hat's going to sit right up in your top end, maybe ticking away at 3 to 5K, leaving all that space in the middle for something else to sit in. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. We'll can identify the vocal, no problem. We can identify the backing vocals, no problem. We can latch onto that Reese and define that, absolutely no issue. We can hear the sample chords and melodies, and we can pick out the hi-hat, the snare and the kick drum in the break. Now if we look at our Reese session here, what is important in the equalizer here, I'm actually taking out this fundamental most of the time to balance it, and the kick drum always sits in that space as well. If we were to open up, say, the HEQ here, we can actually see the kick drum, and we can see that fundamental sitting around the same space that we're taking out here. Now if we were to play the Reese back by itself, and we were to turn this off, you know, allow it to have the full response back, well, it's a lot beefier, it's a lot more weighty, right? But at no point is the Reese necessarily happening when we want that weightiness in. The kick drum fills that space completely fine from the break. And we're thinking, it sounds great. And sure, it sounds great soloed out like this. It's doing its own thing. It's big, filled out sound, especially when we take this away, right? Oof, it's just this big, beautiful sound, but it doesn't work in the mix. And losing this low frequency in context, which we could potentially just filter away, doesn't diminish it at all. The kick drum's always in there. We don't miss it. It fills that space just fine. And when we listen back to this, the snare and hi-hat aren't fighting. We can see this all rolls off nicely, because we've got quite a bit of energy up here in our drum break. If we open up these three different spectrums right here, you can kind of see how they could all work together, right? The bass has got lots of energy here around this point, and we're taking out this low fundamental to make sure the fundamental weight of the kick can come through. All that bass energy is sitting around here, where there's the least amount in the drum break. Now in terms of the strings, they're sitting right up in the middle area, so sort of all around here, just where the snare cuts through really, and you can see that and hear that with the rhythm going on here. The Reese wobbles up now and then, and it's rhythmic, but it's in between the drum beats, so it doesn't fight with the snare, it's going in between those two spaces, back and forth. And the strings just sit in that space consistently, but they're obscured every now and then by the bass rising up and the snare kicking through. But because it's so quick, we don't really notice it, the whole strings still sound like they're there. We need to think about that when we structure the track together. For example, if we look at the Reese again, soloed, let's say we decided we want a big old lift here, and that sounds wicked. We like that, and we want our low end in. And it does sound pretty cool, right? It's pretty, beefy and ripping. Problem is, that's now going to start obscuring all this area of the strings a lot more frequently, and it's probably going to start obscuring our snare as well, even though it's nice and rhythmical. See how much more separated that is and how much more focus comes into the strings and drums when we take that back? Now it's obviously an over-exaggerated example. It is sound design, but I'd very unlikely put a, 12 dB boost, 11 dB boost in there. But the difference is clear. It obscures the focus of the other elements. Another simple thing with sound design as well is, say your bass and your kick have got that same kind of fundamental sound. Well, on the bass, make it so it ramps up. So when you do trigger that bass right as the kick comes in, it has a little ramp up before it brings that low end frequency in, and the kick will hit nice and quickly and it'll ramp up and move in together. Then there's the obvious factor of mixing, where we've got EQ, filters, multiband compression, dynamic EQ, sidechain compression, and all those different tools we can use, and they've all got utilization in different ways to create different types of separation. Let's have a look at some concepts and examples so you can actually hear what's going on and hopefully better understand it. Let's say perhaps the bass in the track is in the way of something else. So let's take the drum break. Let's take the Reese in here. Now we've got our bass channel here. We've got our break channel. They can take the sample out. So we've just got these two. So in this particular instance, I've got Pro MB on here. And what we can see here is that Audio 6 is feeding into Pro MB. And that is the break. And at key moments when the break pops in, you can see the kick knocks the sound down here by about 3 dB or so, and when the snare pops in, it knocks it back by about 2 dB up here. We could take that a whole lot further if we've got a bigger conflict going on. So what we could do here, for example, is let's add in Pro Q3. Any EQ that has a notch filter is going to do the job here for us. So this is on our bass, and the reason I'm using this EQ is because I can do this and show you what's going on by going into audio and grabbing Audio 6, which is the break. I can select the sidechain, and we can now see that in with our bass and exactly how the two are working together. We talked before about choosing sounds where the fundamental frequencies don't overlap. We can see that the kick comes in between two frequencies of the bass most of the time. There are particular notes in the bass where it does overlap, absolutely. Now somewhere around here, it's going to be our fundamental of our snare. We just select on that, we're going to see somewhere around the 200 Hertz range, and we can hear it and see it pop up. Now let's say that our bass is masking that. There is absolutely no reason we can't go absolutely extreme and do something like this. Clearly, we've taken far too much out of the bass right there. If we narrow that notch down a bit, we can find, it's going to be about there, those key frequencies that sit through in the drum break. Now, as long as our drum break and our bass are always going to be playing together, we don't miss anything in that sound, do we? We can disable this. There's nothing missing in the Reese, even though we've cut a big chunk out, because it's filled by that break fundamental part of the sound that's always there. If we were having some kind of obstruction going on with the highs, look at using our filters and maybe even curve off the Reese. Take out any of that high end to rebalance it up. Again, we're not missing anything in the Reese by doing this. It just gives us a much more clear focus on all the highs and the important things that are going on. This is where we need to talk about automation, in where these two things might not always have exactly the same relationship. And it's times like that that you'd want to automate. So for example, let's say there is a section in this track where the bass rolls along and there is no break. And in fact, that does happen at another point in the track. For example, let's say here where we have a bit of a breakdown section, perhaps there was no break intended to be in that part. And we decide to roll that with something like this. Well, that's when we need to start looking at automation, and we would maybe automate this to come back and allow us to have those highs back in that bass, and potentially disable this. or alternatively automate its frequency so it goes out of spectrum. Then when the break was to come back in, we'd bring it back into where it needs to be and block those sounds off again, which makes automation massively key. If you want to see how different types of automation are used, I will link a video in the description below or up at the top right now where I explain in depth the different types of automation that we use. Now, obviously I touched on it for a second, but I'd be regress if we didn't look at the normal kind of sidechain. The more traditional, less detailed and intricate side of sidechain is just as valuable. So let's mute both of the Pro EQ and Pro MB on here and just put a stock Logic compressor. And if we load up my preset here, it's called a FET Sidey. I like using the Studio FET because it adds a load of noise and that kind of gives like a movement and rhythm added into the sound, just to bring another benefit in there. So again, we can use the sidechain option here and just route our break into it, Audio 6. Now we've got the whole drum break routed into this. This is going to send this all over the place in terms of the sidechain, right? It's smashing it down at all times. What we need to do here is make sure we utilize a filter, much like we would in an EQ. This time we're going to isolate just the areas we want to be affected. So if we put listen on the filter, we're going to hear the drum break twice. And now there's no bass whatsoever. For example, if we were to solo the bass, we're now hearing the drum break because we've got this listen filter on. And this is going to let us narrow down what we need to be. Now mode could go in low pass and we could just bring it right down, just pick up all the low end. I often put it in band pass, let us be a little bit more accurate and we can find just that kick. And from here, this is set up how I already like it. Feel free to copy if you're making DnB. And I'll just dial in the threshold now to where I want it to be based on that kick. And you can see, it's now just taking it down a few dB in the kind of settings that I like. And now when we put the filter on, we're back to our bass and it's being dipped out by just the kick in that drum break. And again, that's creating a little bit of space for that kick drum to punch through. But this time it's taking the whole of the bass down and adding an extra rhythm to it. In this track I didn't want to do that, which is why I used the Pro MB to just pull down the low end at those key moments instead. But here we are in context. Just lets that drum punch through. And it's just a little bit harder to pick out without it there. Obviously we can wildly exaggerate this by nailing the threshold down, if you so desire. That's far too extreme for me and I like more of a subtle balance. Somewhere between the 3 and 5 dB mark tends to work pretty well. In summary, if you want to get that separation, those defined separate sounds in your final mix, it starts early on with the sound selection and the choices you're making when you're designing sounds, selecting sounds, choosing the key you're going to work in, the production of the track itself and the overall melodies and how everything's going to sit together before you even get to that separation and slicing out in the mixing stage. It'll make things so much easier for you at that stage when things are already separated element wise and you can hear all the parts in the mix before you start applying filters and cutting things away, applying sidechain compression to duck other things away and getting really technical. If you start off with the fundamentals of good sound selection and good arrangement and good sound design, it's going to be very easy to get this separation at the mix stage. I really hope that's been helpful for you, and if you like producing this type of music, you should check out this video next where I do a track completely from scratch and you can even download the template. I look forward to seeing you in that one. Take care. Easy trip. In today's video, I just thought I would go over basically the Lexicon reverbs, but specifically I use this RC48 one. So if you already have these and you don't really use them, I'm hoping I can give you some ideas right here that you might make use of them in your tracks. And I'll show you a little something that it's not the standard to dump it on a vocal kind of thing. I'll show you a real reason that I reach for this reverb all the time. All right, this might not be the type of tune for everybody. It's pretty heavy liquid drum and bass type thing. What kind of tune or not, it's a wall of sound and it's relatively well mixed considering it's still a whip. The reason we use this, the very first thing, right? Let's grab this snappy snare. Tiny little but it layers in with the rest of the breaks. And the kick and the snare are tuned to F, 1 octave apart. So they're kind of musical in the way they work together. And then the break fills in all the space in between and everything's tuned together. But focusing on the thing we're here for. This really short sound, I've basically done like a little ramp up with the sliders, looking that funny. Let's just mute it off and put a fresh version of RC48 on here. First things first, this one is mono, so it's all dead center. We don't get loads of spread. I wanted the reverb to have its own space and basically be there without making the snare not work as it should in that part of the stereo mix. So first things first, whenever people load it up, it comes on wet. Only, really useful if it's on a bus. I put it on channels in this instance. I'm only going to put it on this snare, so I'll stick it on the channel itself. So we flip it over to mix and we've got our wet dry, so we've already got a better blend straight away. DnB's really fast music, a pre-delay could be fine. We're at 174, so like a 20 millisecond pre-delay will be kind of rhythmic and work all right. But we've got very little space, and if we want a bit reverb sound, we can give ourselves that 20 milliseconds and have it be instant. Now the other thing I really like this reverb for is I can actually kind of use it as an EQ and add a bunch of high end, which seems odd, but let me show you what I mean. The first thing is we've got this rev damp over here, right? That's basically like dipping this down on the high end, kind of like doing a high shelf on an EQ, like tailing it away. If we actually ramp this right up, it goes full range of 32 kilohertz for all the cats and dogs out there that can hear that. But it's relevant, and it represents it up here in a nice little spectrum display. We can see that high end being re-represented, right, in 20 kilohertz. The reason it goes all the way up, it generates all that sample information all the way up, so we can hear it nicely all the way back down, which is a lovely touch. So if we do that, already our snare is way more brighter than it was. So it was all the way back here. Yeah, we're giving all that psh, psh, psh. I love adding that in to the snare and things like breaks to make them really have loads of air and vibrance and like really be lifted up, right? Okay, now it's a nice touch, right? We're using reverb kind of like an EQ, a little bit of a adjustment there. Now the other thing is the high cut. We can take this even further and we can give it loads of energy back, and you look at the way it smears in the visual feedback. You can get an idea. It's giving us more top end the more we do this, as you would expect. It's a high cut, right? So again, I'm lifting that high end up without pumping it or adding anything to it. We're adding a bunch of new frequencies with the delay. I want to show you a little technique here where you've got, say, drums at the start of a track and you may be sweeping them up with a filter. Automate this and you can get such a great feel. I'm just going to show you an example by just ramping it up. So watch this, or listen to this more like. Tasty little trick there for you. Okay, the other thing now is the mids and the crossovers. So the mids is going to be our high end in this case, the way we're going to use it. The more we give that, the longer it goes. So it's time. This would now be 32 seconds. Obviously way too much. And then the crossover lows. I'm going to make the lows really quick. And I don't only want like a second or two really in this. And then we can adjust the crossover for how much high end we again wanting to have. So all the way down here, basically nothing. And we find our balance with the crossover. Like that. We can pump up the distance if we want. Dial it into exactly where we want it. Taking it away. It's cool, isn't it? Now the other thing was the size and the shape. Shape, think of it like the number of walls in the room. It's not exactly what it is, but it's a nice way to think of it. You know, square room's going to have a shape of 4 different sides, and you're going to have like very base reflections, right? Whereas we can ramp this all up to a magical room that's got 250 walls, so we get loads and loads of reflection. That's the easy way to think of it. I quite like something relatively low down here for this kind of instance, and I want to bring the room size in a bit as well. And we can give ourselves a bit of a longer tail if we want again. Really shape it out like that. Let's take it away again. Now, all in all, it probably sounds a little bit much, and partly done that because it's a video and need you to be able to hear what's going on. So what I can do now is dial it in context with the wet dry. If we have a look at the one that I built before with my nice little ramp, that's exactly left on 30, but in this instance I think I'd bring this back to somewhere like that. What about in context of the whole track? How much difference does it really make? We'll focus on the snare, right? Take it away. Gives us that little high on that air, that wasn't there before. We've not done it with the EQ, we've not had it saturated, we've not had any layers. I've used this to bring it in. And people think it's limiting because you've only got these 6 sliders, but once you realise the rev damp, the crossover, spread, diffusion, everything all link into those, the amount of different things you can do with it is actually pretty incredible. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. And we've not even gone to the fact that you can adjust your pre-echoes, do it over the left and right, and this is a mono one. So let's have a quick look in a second. What have I got? What's this? So here I've used it on this pad which runs across the first part of the track, fades out, and we bring it back in later. It's like a musical element that keeps coming back round. It's like this street recording pad type thing, right? It's just helping everything layer over and over and over. And again, completely different settings dialed into this particular sound. Let's have a look at our pre-echoes and the fact that we can actually move each individual pre-echo to exactly where we want it in this kind of design. And by doing this kind of a ridiculous stagger here, we're going to get the sound layering over itself and over itself, almost like polyrhythm wise. And we can bring it to a ridiculous extent as well. So now let's adjust the level of these early ones. Hopefully now you can hear that layering and stuttering effect that's starting to come in. Let's tighten them all up again. Alright, and then versus spreading them all out. Really, really nice way to build out pads and give it a kind of ambient effect, which is what you want with this sort of sound, right? Which sits in with everything else, like so. I want it to fill out that space and the ether. There's a compressor controlling it for when the drums want to pump through. If we listen to it in wet, it's now just the wet signal that's coming through. Now if we highlight them all again, hopefully you can really get a perception of that. Almost hear the delay, like it's a long distance, like a long platform, a long empty room. And that's still having everything on Hall. We can take it even further by putting it on random Hall. Got a different set of things to work with now. Different algorithm, effectively. See? Is why I use the RC48 reverb all of the time. If you don't have it, you haven't ever picked up Native Instruments Complete, I would recommend at some point, if you want to get into making music more and more, it's one of the best offers you can do is picking up Complete when it's on like the 50% sale, end of year, summer sale, something like that. The amount of stuff it comes with is phenomenal. It's got so many phenomenal sounds in it. But if you equally don't want to spend on something like that, or for whatever reason you don't want Complete, look for any of the good lexicon options out there. There's a Relabs one. They do a limited version of it, which is a little cheaper. The full one's like more than buying Logic again, which is wild to me. UAD do a good one as well. And then, or something like Valhalla Verb as well is another really, really great option. But they work in a similar fashion, and you can do basically the same things I've shown you with here today. And I hope that's useful for you. I hope it gives you some ideas and some reasons that if you have these and haven't been using them, I'd love you to give this a go and see what you can do with it in your tracks. What's up, troop? In today's video, we are going to dive into the foundation of drum and bass, EDM, electronic music in general, and it is the bass, but specifically below that 60 hertz range, the sub bass. Because if the sub bass isn't there, the track kind of feels like it's sort of off in the ether, floating around. But when you get to a club system or a decent set of monitors, or even just a big home hi-fi system, without the sub bass there, everything feels kind of thin. So in today's video, we are going to dive into having that sub element there, how we can manage it, how we can best integrate it into a track. Can we add it afterwards? Do we need to take it from a sample? Do we have to have it separate all the time? Does it need to be in mono? We're addressing that one first. So I've covered reasons for having the sub bass in mono before in the video up here if you wanted to watch that and go through it. So I'm not going to dive too deep into it. There are reasons to have that below the 60 hertz range summed into mono or as a mono source, however you want to look at doing that. If you're making club music, big subsystems and clubs, I know this from years of experience, are often summed to mono. I've even worked in clubs where they only actually take the left channel out of the mixer and only the left channel goes around the club. So if you've got a sub bass and it's, you know, meshing with something else and it's being summed to mono, you can end up losing a lot of that. If you think of your 5.1 surround system, that below 60 hertz range goes to a single unit speaker, gets summed to mono there. Again, if you've got conflicting waves, which at this point the waves are huge, like the whole length of this room for a single wave, just a slight bit out of alignment and they can start phasing and cancelling each other out. You can absolutely play around with the idea of having a big wash go over to the left or the right that brings that sub, or sweeping sub and bringing it from one side to the other for a sonic experience, especially if you're working in film. That absolutely happens. You've been in a film where the explosion comes boom off from this side and you feel it come from that direction, but all of that is still in your mind because the very simple fact is the sub frequencies are still coming from that one location and we can't really perceive direction of those sub frequencies. So the safe bet is if you're making electronic music that's going to a club environment or is designed for that purpose, it's a safe bet to keep sort of below 60 hertz, definitely mono compatible, if not summed to mono or a mono source. If you're going to be distributing that music with the likes of DistroKid, which is yearly fee, lets you distribute an unlimited amount of music, people are going to be consuming that in different formats as well, and that can also affect it. You want it to be a consistent playback on any system that they so choose to be using. They might have a massive hi-fi system with a big sub in there and you want it to translate on that as well as you do to the guy listening to your brand new track that you've just released in his headphones that he got with his iPhone. Let's look beyond this being just a sine wave. We've already addressed that as a general rule, below below 60 Hertz, that tends to be your sub. Now, as these fleshy, water retaining human things that we are, we don't actually really hear that frequency very much. We feel it and experience it a lot more than we pick it up with our ears. We feel it in our chest and our guts. When there's a huge whoosh of air, we feel the air move past us. We experience sub, but we also perceive it. See, if we've got harmonics in a track and we can hear those harmonics, our brain tells us that there's a low end sub. This is why earbuds work as well as they do. They don't produce that frequency range, but because it's there, because the harmonic experience is happening throughout the rest of the music, this can absolutely be lost in a low quality MP3, by the way. You still perceive that big sub bass to be there. However, this is one thing we address. If you've got just a clear sine wave and no correlation with that sine wave, so no other harmonic steps to let your ear know it's there, that's when you kind of don't hear it. And that's why things like distortion and the new plugin in Logic, like Chroma Glow, can be really useful to add a little bit of harmonic distortion, which gives a harmonic relationship to that sine wave. And the glow up. Even just for me sitting here, massive difference. One's way more perceivable and feels like a big subby sound, even though we know what just happened. Let's look at this in practice in some of my tracks, because I can show those without getting told off by YouTube. Here, for example, we've got a nice analyzer at the bottom here. I've had to go really detailed, so it moves a little janky, but this way we can see the harmonic relationship. We're going to play a little bit from the intro where there's not really any like sub frequency specifically. There's a whole bunch of noise because we're seeing well below at minus 100 dB on the scale here. But when you notice, whenever there's a harmonic here up in the sub, notice that it's got a relationship, that you can see them here. And that's the reason that it is as audible as it is, because if it was just that sub and then we negated to have anything else there, anything else to have a harmonic relationship to it, it just wouldn't work. So here's one example. I don't know if I ever released this tune, but here we are. Hopefully there you can really focus on the low end and see that the kick's in between the harmonics as well, but it's got the same harmonic relationship, and that's how we're keeping that big weighty sub in there without getting in the way of it. And an even better example, we've got the mix here before it was mastered of Do Right, and you can see them so clearly in the mix and the relationship, and hear how everything translates to having that big weighty sub. Everything there, you can see that relationship happening all below 100 Hertz. But when we've got them in, we've got the harmonics coming up here, all the way up into like the 500 region. They're all related together. I'll link any of the tracks below if you want to have a listen through and check them out yourself. Now let's talk the power of separating your bass out or your sub from everything else. There's a couple of reasons to do this, although it isn't 100% essential. The first thing is you've got control of that sub element. It needs to be the loudest thing in the mix for it to be perceivable due to the way we hear in the Fletcher-Munson curve. The lower the frequency down, the higher the volume that needs to be in the mix, which means it takes up a crap load of headroom. If you separate it out, it means you can duck it down, move it, fade it away at key moments when you want other things to take precedent, or if you want to lift the rest of the mix up a bit in level and balance everything out. It gives us room to do that. It also means if it's been separated out, we can do things like sidechain compression to move just that out of the way without affecting everything else. Another general rule that you can do here is to have your kick drum be above that sub-hertz frequency, but sometimes we want a subby weighty kick. But if we've got a kick with a fundamental around the 100 Hz range, that can also be affecting the fundamentals that allow perception of the sub to exist. So we can use that sidechain to help move everything like the fundamentals and duck it out the way for a moment, so we can bring the kick through and then let the sub regain back through with its fundamentals and everything that picks up the ear and weight. This allows us to maintain a good level and a good balance of the sub together. Let's have a look at some examples of that in a track as well. So I've picked here an example for you from a mobile game. I did this way back in 2016. And it was mixed with that intent, and I've grabbed this because it showcases exactly what I've been talking about in great context right here. So this is the main drop and the loop in the track. And there's two fundamental things that make up all of the low ends. We can grab them here. And they're doing exactly the things I've been talking about, which is why I grabbed it. If we open up a Fab Filter here, ooh, Fab Filter 2. So you can literally see what I've got going on. Now, strictly over here, this isn't just sub. It's going all the way up to 400 Hz, but it's got all those fundamental harmonics that lets it stick out from something like a mobile game that's going to be played on iPads and phones, right? And I've got the crossover here at 300 Hz, leaving about 100 Hz in the middle, which, if I remember, is right where the snare sits. So it gives it that space at all times. And then as well, the two are being sidechained. Whether or not I did them independently or together, we'll discover in a second. You can see they're both responding exactly the same there, so we could then have done that on the bus as well. But we have the option to, if I so needed, make the sub respond faster or have a longer recovery to keep it suppressed with that kick without affecting the top end of the bass, which is all of this. And as a result, this mix translated really well to those smaller mobile devices and gave the atmosphere for the game that we were after. Now, if you're working from like a sample or a synth that generates that sub, for example, you have things like Serum, which have a sub direct out, you can still separate those out. It's really easy to do it perfectly with an EQ. You set up what's called a crossover point, and this is exactly how a system works that has a sub in it. It has a crossover where at a certain frequency, it fades down and then fades down, and you create a cross with an EQ, just like this. Two things that can make this really stand out. The first thing is compression, when you rejoin everything together. We looked at separating the sub bass out from the bass sounds to give it its own portion of control. We can sidechain it separately, we can do things separately without having to really affect the overall level of our track by having a sub that sits there the whole time. What we'll do is send all the sounds related with that sub off to a bus, and we compress them all together, and this kind of stops it feeling like this sub's off here on its own and the mid bass is here and the high bass is here. They instead all just glue together and they all react and respond as one big sound, which is what we want at the end of the day. Now the other thing is the sub bass doesn't have to be static. It can fall into the same category of being filtered out and wobbled as any other bass to give it loads of feel. And if you do this with a sub bass, you can create a way epic feeling in a track. You'll hear this really a lot in like house music, where the sidechain will hit so hard that the sub will duck out completely and then whomp back in, bump, whomp back in, over and over. You can experiment with that in your tracks, but the trick is you need to be able to monitor it, or at least understand what's going on in the frequency analyzer for it to work. I really hope the video has been helpful for you. If you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comments down below. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care. Easy Troop. In today's video, I want to explain to you the use of sidechaining. If you haven't heard what sidechaining is before, what it essentially is, you take one signal, something like a kick drum, and you use that to control another signal in terms of its overall level or gating effect. This can be a really useful mix tool to take one element and move another one out the way for a brief period. But we can be more nuanced with that. We can use it to ebb and flow other elements. We can use it to enhance other places as well. It's a far more versatile tool than kick comes in, bass ducks down. So let's get into that. Now the Moog and sub both go into a bus here called Reese. So if I solo that, you can see it takes the Moog and the sub. And we've got that right here. If I open up the Pro Q that is here on the Moog, we can see that these are the Moog harmonics and the red one there is my sub harmonic. So you can see that separation there. And they're just kept separate because on the Moog I can't generate just a clean sine wave. I have to drop everything down an octave, and that doesn't then give me the sound, so just reinforcing it by giving it its own sine wave there below it. On the Reese here you can see I've got 3 different channels sidechaining. If we open up the first one, I use this FET compressor a lot. It's a noisy compressor. It adds sound and kind of grit and a bit of noise really into it when it does its sidechain. I like that effect. You might want to use something like the Platinum Digital up here, which is completely clean. So when we play this back at the minute, we can see that triggering, right? And if we go over into our sidechain and listen, we can hear it's being triggered by the clap or the snare, the noisy thing that I've made in this instance. So we can turn that on over here. So when that clap's hitting, it's pulling the bass back a little bit. That's cool, just dips it down by a couple of dB, about 3 decibels at the absolute peak here. And it does it very, very quickly. So it comes in 5 milliseconds and it's gone in 40 milliseconds. Could be even quicker, but you'll hear why I've come to those sort of timings as we go out throughout this session. Now this one should be tied into the kick, and look, this one takes a lot longer to go away, nearly 80 milliseconds, and that's because I really want you to get the full whack of the kick as it comes in. So let's just have the kick, the bass and the clap all together now. Now it's a really dirty kick in this track. I'll take the clap away. You can hear how that pumps away at the bass and lets everything come through each time it hits, right? Now we can see as well, I've got 2 distinct values of how much it's ducking, because it's ducking based on how hard that kick hits. And they've got a difference of about 6 dB. Now check this out in the context of the mix and focus on that kick drum. I want you to hear how much it pops through, and then I'm just going to adjust the release timings and see how different that can be. Alright, so when the kick happens, everything moves away and it's nice and punchy in there in the mix, right? Now if I bring this release timing down to just 40, it's still there, but we don't hear the kick develop, we don't get its full body. If I make that even shorter, say 20, now the kick's starting to get masked in places, isn't it? We're aware of it, it's still there in the mix, but it's just like puff, puff, doesn't get through. So now we've got that context, I'm going to bring this up to like 80 and listen to how it changes. So much of impact on the kick and being able to hear it and how it develops and it being present. We know before we can still hear the kick, it's like, okay, there's a kick there. Whereas now we get the feeling and the body of the kick just by adding milliseconds into the way it's sidechained. Now, there's another thing that's happening here with the bass and the reason that relationship works so well. Let me show you now the Pro MB, which comes after those two. What? Yeah, I'm actually really lifting up the top end of the Reese here using Pro MB. However, watch what happens when we play back. Can you see what's happening here? So that ebb and flow, when the kick comes in, it takes that top end a little bit away that was really enhanced on the Reese. And even when the kick comes in, it pulls it back a little bit. The whole thing's ebb and flowing, but it's doing it in that we're taking 6 dB away from the low end when the kick comes in. Here mostly gets left alone, and this gets pulled back just a little bit. So it ebbs and flows. Instead of the whole signal going bash down, it kind of brings it down in ebbs and flows and gives it some dynamic movement that's kind of exciting. Let's have it so we've just got the break and just the Reese. Let's have it so we've just got the break and just the Reese, so we can really get an understanding of what's going on and how it ebbs and flows with everything else. These 4 bars I'm going to loop around now, there's lots of slides and movement in the Reese, so it shows up a lot nicer. So let's have a listen to this. We'll have it with Pro MB off, and then we'll bring it in, and you can hear that ebb and flow and movement that's generated in rhythm with the drums that are happening, which is the really important part to me. I really hope you can hear that as much as I can. It's not so much like, it's not a musical change, it's a change in the feel and the rhythm overall. You know, it's that Reese can really have its top end thrown up, but only when it's allowed, only when there's space for it to do so. When there's the clap in or the kick in, it's not allowed to do it. And that means on those little slide ups, when it's sliding and then it allows itself to open up, it just really adds like this wavy ebb and flow to the whole thing. And you know, that's taking it a lot further than kick hits, bass goes down, even though we are looking at a bass. Now let's check out some other things that we can do as well. Within the break itself, I've got sidechaining happening. So if we take just the break that I've built here, and it's not an overly complex break, but let's take this ending section here. Within this itself, there's a couple of things going on. There's this cymbal loop. I say loop, it's a bunch of samples chopped up to do this kind of kung thing. And there's also the classic think break in there, chopped up into a different rhythm for this track. Both of these are sidechained. First thing, the Pro Q4 here, sidechained on the think break. And you can see here it's for the clap. And we're just taking away some of the like body and area in the think break when the clap comes in. Just like box the area here. We want that clap to cut through and have that space, so I'm just letting it move it down in those moments when it needs to. But as well with the think, I'm ducking it much like I was with the Reese as well. It's been slammed down a huge amount, but it's been let go over the 40 milliseconds. And the same with the kick. So really that like ebb and flow of the think break is only allowed in there when there's space. I want the kick and the clap to have the priority, and it gets to fill the space in between. If we take it off, the break's just there constantly, it fills in the space fine. But I want them to have like a punchy and a cut through priority in this case. I don't want that top line there all the time. I want it to ebb and flow, but only when it's got the space to do so. So it makes the kick and clap so much more impactful, doesn't it? I've got the same principle on the cymbal loop over here with the kick. And it lets it go da 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 da, ebb and flow a little bit more with the kick, so it's got a constant rhythm to it. Let's take those side chains away, the whole lot, even the Pro Q. It's really static, not great ebbing and flowing break now, is it? Bring them all back in. It's a whole different thing, isn't it? So we've got that, and then this break that already has that big ebb and flow and movement is the thing that controls the Reese and allows that ebb and flow and that lift up. Let's take away all of those side chaining options in the break and the Reese and listen to just how static and flat and boring it is. So much more like movement, ebb and flow, and like it's kind of live and being played, but it's also giving space for all those individual elements to have their very brief moment to shine, right? Let's take a look at the pads here. The pads fill out quite a bit of space, and I use them at times such as the intro section here, where I want them to be full and have lots of space, but I want that same like feeling of the music, that same tonality later in the track when it's a lot busier, like when we come into here. But I need them out of the way. So again, I'm using side chaining on both of the channel and the buses. So I've got what's called aux 2 pads here. And really it's bringing all these elements together. Alright, so I'm having some control there. Again, kick takes out loads of it when it hits hard, almost 10 dB, get it completely out of the way. And for a long time here, look, 140 milliseconds in this instance, because I need that kick to punch through, and it's going to dip everything else a little bit to give it a bit of space, but I want this to recover back in slowly. This fills up a big space and spectrum, right? If we put an EQ on here, you can see this is filling up all of our mid-range. If it suddenly goes out, boop, back in, we hear that, right? That whole big sweeping in. We bring it in gradually, 140 milliseconds, take it down, bring it in a little bit, bring it in a little bit. It sounds a lot nicer. And you can hear that happening right here. If we do it quickly, it's a little weird, it feels jarring, and it will feel jarring even in the whole mix of context. We can be ridiculous with it. Really like bring it back in slowly. Then the music's almost too fast for that. So up at like 180 is where I've settled. Can push it up into the 200s pretty comfortably, I reckon. That brings it back in naturally with, you know, almost in sync with the sounds, right? Now as well on here, I've got Pro Q. And Pro Q is working with the clap, and it's just ducking out those mid ranges right where the clap sits again, just for those briefest of moments. If we have a look at the settings here, it's a real fast attack, a clap, really fast impacting sound. And we let this go back a little bit quicker because it's already still sweeping back up from the kick. So let's have this in context with the break. So here we go without any of its sidechain. And completely fine. Everything sits pretty well, but we get so much better separation and movement when we do this. Now in context of the whole track, it's arguably a little bit busy. We need it to get out of the way in moments, so. So there we are, there is some of the hidden power of sidechain beyond the classic stick it on the kick and stick it on the bass to get them out of the way. There's so much more you can do with it. And this is just the things I'm showing you in this example. This might hopefully have given you some ideas for some of your music. What I'm going to do now is just let the track play out. Thank you very much to the sponsor of the video, which is DistroKid. If you want to get your music like this out to all of those major distribution platforms, check out the link below for a discount off your first year off of DistroKid, which is how I release all of my music. I'll let you have a listen to this work in progress. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Trap. And it's such an easy trap to fall into as well. And the funny thing is, it comes from a bit of a device that's actually good and sound, and is about preserving the low end of your mix and getting good clarity. And the advice that always comes up is high pass everything. That is a good bit of advice. Having just those few elements filling the smaller frequency space of the low end will help give you clarity in that space and ideally a better mix. Ah, well, he's put the EQ at 89 Hertz and rolled off all the subs so it doesn't affect his sub bass. Wrong. Are you using the same kit, the same bass? Are you in the same key? Are you at the same tempo? Well, you're gonna have a copyright issue. That's a totally separate video. Unless, of course, you release that with DistroKid, who can get you an official license to release a cover version of your song. DistroKid can get all of your music onto all of the major streaming platforms, as well as many of the smaller ones as well. When you upload your cover song, you can also apply for a cover song license, having all of that area covered for you as well, saving some serious headaches. Head to the link in the description below for a discount on your first year. But if you do it in a non-copy paste cookie cutter kind of way, it can really help your mix just stand out a little bit better.
Feeling heavy, but now I'm steady, going up from hitting the ground.
If that's a pretty solid mix for you and you like all the separation, then let's break down how we can do that using the high pass. All right, so we can see just at a glance, there's a couple of channels where I've used the stock EQ and I've got high passes going on, and it's likely happening on a lot of the other ones as well, where I've got, say, neutron here, for example, and some other spaces. So let's go over some key points. The first thing is, when you listen to a sound, is the low end in that sound beneficial? So let's take these three guys that I've got here. So we've got these three sounds and all sound like they're higher end melodies. They're not bass focused sounds. Let's take just this lead individually. Now we know we've got some kind of high pass on here. It's just an ES2 lead. If we open it up, I'm high passing here around the 100. Now initially, look, I had a lift in there, but in the end, I've taken it out and just high passed it away, but I still get kind of a flat response here as a result, right? Now here's the simple thing to do. Let's pop the analyzer on. There's no defined note in that area, right? We can see the clear note is around here, around 200, and I'm rolling off a bit after, but there is a bass tone. Now something you can do to find out if it's not as obvious as that, if there is worthy bass end, let's kind of do the opposite to this. What we'll do, we'll disable this EQ. So what we can do instead to figure this out, stick on a low pass and roll it down. So there, we've got the lowest note. And when the lowest notes aren't in, what are we left with? Right, so we can see we've got this low end, which in some cases is coming up as high as some of the notes, right? Especially around at the 20 here, but it serves no purpose. We can listen to it in isolation like this. It's not tonal, it's not reinforcing anything. It's just there as pure noise. It's not benefiting the sound whatsoever. So in that kind of situation, we're going to get rid of that. We don't need it. It doesn't benefit the song. Now, how do we do that? How did I get to the result of, say, bringing it off to 100? Well, we'll turn the analyzer off, and now we're going to do it by ear, and we're going to A and B it. I don't want anything to become lost in the sound. I still want the same sound to be there, just that useless stuff that was in the low end to go away. And there's no real change. Now, if I was to bring that up to say 200, which is roughly where that bottom tone is, now we get a clear change. So the way I'm dialing it in is to sort of bring it up and A and B it and see if I'm losing something from the sound, it's having a negative effect. And this is how we end up with a mix that's way too thin. Now here's one that might surprise you. Here's the instruments bus for this track. It's got our strings and other bits in there, right? The only thing on it is fab filter and it's high passed. And it's high passed to 68.3 Hertz. It's just where it got dialed into. And very simply, that's done with the same method of just A and Bing. That's not taking anything out, but it's just rolling off. And we can see, if I were to bring it up a little bit higher, we start to lose the bottom of the strings. Any lower, and there's no real difference. There's nothing in here that needs that low end space. There's nothing tonal, so we make sure it's cut away, and that then, for example, the bass line can fit in that space. Now we can see that the low end harmonica, the bass line, has got all this space to itself, and we can see that they're harmonically lined up. Now these guys here are clashing, but they're not causing a problem with each other. Down here in the real low end, where we've only got 20 to 50, so about 30 frequencies to work with, we just want it to have its own space and not be fighting. We can see the same thing here with the break. The key drum, the kick frequency's got its own space here. Now, I could probably get rid of this low end here in the drums, but it wasn't causing an issue in the mix, so I haven't. I've left it with that extra energy. Let's condense this down to 5 key points. 1, is that low end beneficial to that sound? 2, check for tonality using that low pass. 3, does it work with the kick? Does it reinforce it or does it hinder it? A and B the high pass to make sure you haven't lost the body of the overall sound and it hasn't become thin, and high pass your buses as well. So as you can see, doing this can really help your track and give you nice clarity, spacing in a mix, and help you achieve a nicer balance as well. Now another technique you can use to really help you balance your track and get mix clarity is using mono mixing, and I covered that in this video here, and that's probably the one that you should watch next.
Okay, so getting this vocal to work in this track has been absolutely killing me. So I'm gonna go over with you the things I've done and how I've implemented to get it to somewhere where I'm somewhat happy with it. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I don't ever feel that about any of my tracks, to be honest, but it's much better and it's getting there. I just want you to know that in context, even someone like myself who's done many, many tracks at this point still has these nightmares when they're trying to produce and get their ideas together. So let's go over some of the things things I've done to bring it into light. This is what we're currently working with.
Stuck inside a disarray, I can't overcome, and I feel the current underway, pulling me down. And I've been sifting through a way, so I will drown. But my body sends me drifting as I feel the waves increasing. Then
All right, let me take off all of the processing on that vocal, and I'll leave it as it was in the track, where it's balanced enough that you'll be able to hear parts of it, but then it's so dynamic it completely dips away and whatnot. You'll see what I mean. Case and point, and even if we bring it up for 3 dB, well, yeah, the things that are standing out the most are the S's and whatnot, right? Now, one of the first things I've done to bring this into itself is I've built all these reverses and whatnot at the start here. So let's solo these guys out, and these just kind of signal to us what's coming in. There's a completely separate video on how I build those in Logic if you want to watch that, but that's the first thing. It just gives our ear a little something of, oh, this vocal's about to come in, this is how it's going to sound, this is where it is in the mix, and gives us that signal that it's there. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. So the first thing I've got in here is Auto-Tune Pro, and all it's doing is some correction to bring a couple of the notes that drifted in between notes back into space.
been stuck inside a disarray, I can't overcome, and I feel the current underway.
So it's not a bad vocal by any means, but it's just a couple of notes that are ever so slightly off, and with translation to everything else, they just need a little gentle pullback, and that is what Auto-Tune is doing there. We can hear the louder phrases in the vocal, even when it's on its own with no processing, but those S's, they really stick out. So the next thing in here, controlling those issues right away, is the Pro DS. And if we just play back here, we can really see how prominent some of those are. So now you can probably just still pick out the top parts of the vocals that are the loudest. Bear in mind, I've dropped this down 3 dB in my mix, so it would be 3 dB louder as well. And you can see that those really loud S's that were sticking through before, they're now being controlled and they don't jar out with the vocal. So we've corrected 2 issues right off the bat here, okay? Doing a lot of heavy lifting here. It's the CLA vocals. We switch that on and there's a lot of compression going on here. So there's a lot of compression going on here. So we've got those louder phrases that are sticking through in the mix already. Everything else is getting lost. So we're gonna bring those louder phrases down, and then we're gonna level everything else up. Simple compression. So it's just going to squish that vocal so it sits a bit more in shape. We're also doing a bit of shaping here. We're lifting the top up because we seem to have lost quite a lot of inertia. Her voice is really quite delicate. So we're really giving a nice boost into the tops here. We're adding reverb. There's a delay being added, and there's a bit of stereo widening, and the stereo is on, but reduced down massively in terms of its pitch shifting, but it does a huge amount. Here we go. Okay, so I've really squished that in there using CLA vocals, giving it a little bit of space and everything as well, and those are the settings that I've come to, sliding it around. I don't often use everything, but everything's being used in this case, and that's where we managed to dial it into. Now, if we were gain staging it, what we would then do is look at the output here and dial it back, but instead I've used the compression amount here to get it to the level I want it to be at, which turned out to be a little bit too loud, and later I've used the fader just to bring it down 3 dB. But that's what I did here. So I've gauged it with the compression because I knew the louder parts were sticking out already. I need to bring everything else up, and that's where we've ended up pushing it here on the spank of the compression and pumping it right up there. So we've done a lot there, so now it really sticks out. And here we're still only peaking at about -9. If we take the CLA off, yeah, so it's adding a good chunk there. Right, so after that we've then got Fab Filter. Fab Filter's doing some really specific control. I wanted to bring some areas up here that were being lost with inertia, and once we've really compressed that, the de-esser's kind of working overtime at the start, but there's still some phrases that have a real S issue, so I've controlled that up here with Pro Q after the compression stage. So it's being de-essed, which is compression taking away at those key moments, then getting compressed again with CLA vocals to really bring all the level up, but that's bringing some issues up in the real high frequency here, and you'll see the control happening. So that's what there's doing. It's another issue fix. All the creative stuff's happened in the middle, and it's helped another issue come to the surface. So we're just looking to fix that. This just helps those vocals pop through in those key moments. And you can see there's energy missing here. So times it's needed, this lifts it up. And there's too much energy up here, and this controls it at those key moments. And after that, believe it or not, I've got more compression. And this is adding a little even more gain, which, you know, why I've had to bring it down 3 or 4 dB in the end, but I really like this soft compression, just capturing those big rises. It's such a dynamic vocal. It had something like 35 dB of dynamic range between the quiet and loud parts, so I've had to nail that right down so it really sits in the mix, and this was the end way to do that. And yes, it is louder, but it's not clipping, and it sits where I want it in the mix, even though I've had to control it with the fader afterwards. That's what the fader's there for, that final balance, once we realise we've made all these mistakes. So that's not the only other thing that's happening. There's actually a send to reverb and delay as well. I've got bus 7 and 10 here. So hopefully we can hear that reverb there. That's an RC48 over here. And it's just adding loads of top end reverb, really. Filtered it. But it gives it its own space. Now, I know I've already added reverb with the CLA vocal, but this is just its own dedicated space, and I can really control it with that fader. The CLA is just giving it a little bit beforehand. Even on that, I like all this extra reverb, and I hope it also makes you feel like it stands out in the mix a bit more too. It's very upfront and dry. That's very much now in its own space. Right, and the last thing is I've got this Vox delay send just here, right next to it, with a tape delay on. And this is automated throughout the verses. So if we zoom in here, we can see what it's doing. And if we play these sections here, you can listen to what that automation is doing. It's filling in the gaps where there used to be breaths and other things that I've cut out and put fades in for. But it just helps the vocal keep like transitioning and moving into the next phrase. Delay wise, it's set up for 1/4 triplet, and that gives this kind of effect. Check out.
Pulling me down, and I've been sifting through a way, so I will drown. But my body sends me drifting, pulling me down, and I've been sifting through a way, so I will drown. But my body sends me drifting.
And the way that works is we're automating the feedback here to push into it. It's only 14% wet, it's just a little signal in the background. Most of the time there's almost no feedback, it gets taken right back.
Pulling me down, and I've been stuck inside a disarray I can't overcome, and I feel the current underway, pulling me down.
And that rhythm is just sitting in there with everything else and just adding an extra little bit of vibe, and in my opinion really helps the vocal shine through.
Stuck inside a disarray I can't overcome, and I feel the current underway, pulling me down, and I've been sifting through a way, so I will drown.
So there we go, that's how I've made the vocals that were very difficult to get where I wanted to in this track really shine through. I hope that's been helpful for you and given you some ideas and things you might want to do in your vocals, and potentially not worry too much about all those little nuances and things that people tell you about gain staging and adding loudness and whatnot. If it needs to sit in the mix and it needs to come up those in level, do it, get it to the right place. I hope it's been helpful for you. I look forward to see you in the next one. Take care.